Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our monthly webinar series with APA Virginia. Thanks to the Berkeley Group, your hour with the Berkeley Group. We're going to give everybody about a minute to get in and get settled, and then we will get started. All right, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and get started. We want to be conscious of everybody's lunch hour that they're joining us. My name is Martina James. I'm with APA Virginia, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to spend the next hour with us. A couple quick reminders before I hand it over to our presenters. Of course, we have the 2021 part 2 of our annual conference coming up at Hotel Roanoke in October 20th through the 22nd. It is a reduced program, but still full of wonderful sessions. Also 1.5 CM credits in legal and 1.5 CM credits in ethics will be available as well. There is a hybrid option, but it is limited. It won't be the whole conference, so you will only be accessing a portion of the conference. And tickets are still available. There are only 200 tickets available, so we have some left. And exciting is our hotel block has been extended through the end of this week. It was supposed to close last Friday. So there's still the opportunity to take care of, or to take advantage, excuse me, of the reduced sleeping room rate of $179. So again, I'd encourage you to visit apavirginia.com. If you got our reminder this morning, all the links are in there where you can register. You can find out more information about the mobile tours we'll be doing on Wednesday, the 20th, as well as the full program of sessions and presenters that we will be hearing from while we are there. So you can find that under the annual conference tab. Also, we'll remind you that you can find all of our webinars on the virginia.planning.org. Just like this one, we will host another one in October and again in November. October 25th, we have Using Food as Economic Development, and November 15th, which is a week earlier than our normal date due to the Thanksgiving holiday. From noon to 1, we'll have Cycling for Sustainable Cities. So we hope you're able to join us for those webinars as well. A couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started. As always, we encourage you to submit questions through the Q&A box in your control panel. We will be watching the Q&A box throughout the program and take those questions at the end. If you'd like to ask your question live, you can use the raise the hand icon or shoot us a message in the chat box. And then when we move into Q&A, you will be able to unmute and turn your camera on and ask your question live to our presenters, which is always a fun way to interact. I will put the CM credit number. This is eligible for 1 CM credit. I will put that in the chat box as well. And then as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube page to view along with every other month that we have for you to view at your leisure or for you to share with somebody else. So again, if you all have any questions throughout, I encourage you to submit them. We're looking forward to hearing from our presenters. This month is Using Technology to Improve Small Urban and Rural Transit. This webinar will provide an overview of service delivery, innovation, and transit technology best practices for public transportation in small and rural communities. It will begin with an overview of national planning practices that will cover areas such as accessibility, passenger information, and general transit feed specifications, fare payment, and microtransit. Following this overview, the presenters will share the findings from the Public Transportation in Appalachia report, which includes a transit service inventory and assessment covering the 420 counties across 13 states, including Virginia, served by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Best practices and challenges in implementing new technologies across the Appalachian region will also be explored. At this point, I will hand it off to our presenters, Shana Johnson and Ronaldo Hermano. And I probably just butchered that, Ronaldo. I'm sorry. And I will let you guys go from there.
Sure.
So Ronaldo, let's get your presentation up and get it situated to make sure we don't have Any more quirks?
Mm-hmm. You still see the
At the top, just the top piece,
yes.
but otherwise it's
I'm gonna hide it now.
perfect.
Okay.
You're
Great.
good to go.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Reynaldo Germano. I'm a transportation planner, a senior transportation planner at Foursquare ITP. I work a lot. I've been working a lot with rural and small urban projects, and I've started working with. So I worked in both of the projects that we're going to talk about today, and yes, I think that's a brief introduction of who am I. Shana Johnson is also here. Shana, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. My name is Shana Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Service Delivery for Foursquare ITP. I also lead our demand management practice as well as oversee our work in new mobility. And as Reynaldo mentioned, he worked on both of these studies, as did I, and we're very excited to share them with you this morning. I am particularly excited as I was involved with the chapter for many years and then moved to Maryland for a bit, but I'm now back in Virginia. So I'm really excited to re-engage with the chapter here today.
So as I've already mentioned and Shana said too, we're going to present two projects. I'm going to start with this first project that is promising work. It's a work that we developed for the National Center for Applied Technology, Transit Applied Technology, National Center for Applied Transit Technology, NCAT. And it's a guidebook on promising practices of technology adoption. And Shana is going to present our work for the Appalachian Regional Commission on a transit inventory that we did. So, okay. Yes. So today I'm presenting some findings of the guidebook we at Foursquare ITP developed for the National Center for Applied Transit Technology. My presentation is organized in three main sections. First, I'm going to explain the types of promising practices and what is a promising practice. Then I'm going to detail three case practices that we have in the guidebook, and finally discuss some common themes across them that basically recipes for success. So first, I apologize. Yes, that's correct. So the National Center for Applied Transit Technology is a technical assistance center with a mission to provide small urban, rural, and tribal transit agencies with practical resources that help them adopt technological solutions and innovations. So many of those technology-based innovations in transportation have been largely restricted to systems in large and urban dense areas. So this guidebook, it fits perfectly under NCAT's mission. So, and in which we try to build this as a resource for transit agencies in understanding, selecting, and otherwise planning to incorporate new transit technology into service. So this guidebook, it details profiles. We went out and looked at agencies that were doing exemplary work throughout North America, and we interviewed those agencies, and we tried to gather a lot of information and what they mean, lessons learned, and what other agencies could learn from their from many things throughout the implementation of those works. And what we say work, and what I'll be talking about, and what is the title of the guidebook that is promising practice. This is a technology innovation that one agency, at least one organization, has implemented, and it shows promising during its early stages for becoming a recommended practices with long-term sustainable impact. So in some cases, our practices are really something that are very innovative and new. And sometimes the innovative aspect of it is just implementing something that is established in larger contexts to a smaller agency, to a rural agency. So what are those types of, so we looked at 10 practices in this guidebook, and those practices we organized them under 8 groups, so practice types that we are calling, we have the accessibility. So this accessibility, it means improving access to information, or improving the relationship between agency and their final client, when a client has some sort of hearing impairment, visual impairment, so with really disabled populations. Alternative fuels is another group that we have. We profile 2 agencies here in this guidebook. One that is using cooking oil into a mix to develop a biodiesel. It's a tribal agency that has a casino. The kitchen oil from the oil from the kitchens, the casino kitchens, they have their in-place plant that will convert this oil mix this with diesel and have a biodiesel mix. We have access management, that is an agency that has moved from paper-based asset management technology to an application based on the phone. We have passenger information and GTFS feed. That is one of the examples we're going to discuss in this presentation. We have computer-aided technology and, computer-aided dispatch and automatic vehicle location, so CAD-AVL. Again, we're going to talk about. It's basically a solution that that lowers the bar for technology, the actual piece of technology that you have needs to have in a vehicle. Fair payment, this is an overview of practices in the country related to fair payment. Microtransit is another one that we're discussing today in this presentation, which is experience of one agency implementing the microtransit service. And finally, mobility hubs, that is one of those examples in larger agencies that show potential to be scaled on to small and urban rural contexts. So as I've mentioned before, we profiled 10 practices across the country, North America. We have one case in Canada. And sometimes those practices are in larger context, but they always have something that relates them back to a rural or small transit agency, small urban context. Of those 10 profiles, 9 are specific cases. One is the fair payment is a composite one. Here is a map. You can see on the screen a map that shows where those examples are, those practices are located, and what type they are. And today I'm going to talk only about 3 because of the time. I think it would be virtually impossible to talk about 10 of them. So I selected the computer-aided dispatch and automatic vehicle location, CAD-AVL, now on. That is the experience of the Regional Transportation Corporation of Burtnuff. And I'm going to talk about the microtransit experience that Johnson County in Kansas have, and Vermont's implementation of the passenger information and the work with GTFS feeds in that state. So the practices. I'm going to start with the Canadian practices. So traditionally, CAD and AVL systems, they've been largely limited to they've been mostly limited to large agencies that could afford very complex and bundled solutions that would include CAD-AVL and other pieces of technology that are added to the vehicle. But there are some emerging CAD-AVL innovations that they reduce this capital investment that is needed to install equipment on your vehicle. Those usually means that your vehicle is going to be equipped with an off-the-shelf GPS technology. It can be a smartphone, a tablet, And the software solution for this system, it's usually a software as a service. So those are business models where the agency subscribes for service, and most times the software solution is on a browser interface. So this is very accessible for small agencies that don't have necessarily a lot of computer and a lot of people, a lot of time to dedicate, to have time and staff to be dedicated to working with this. So having a smaller solution has worked very well in this specific case. So the agency, again, is the corporation, the Regional Transportation Corporation of Portneuf, so CTRP because it's in French. The location is the Portneuf Regional County Municipality. So this is a municipality that includes a pretty big rural area west of Quebec City. And the context varies from small villages to small urban to rural areas. So they have something that looks like commuter services that connect smaller towns to Quebec City, but they also have a demand response service for elderly that is this something similar to a countywide demand response service. So they use, in their solution, they're using smartphones to geolocate vehicles, and they have this CAD AVL module that is integrated with a fare collection solution. So the same smartphone is sending information of location, but it's also sending information on fare collection. And this allows the provider to see from one web page and the operational center ridership data and vehicle location in detail and in real time. So what you see in the vehicle is very simple. It's really a smartphone next that the driver can see and look, and that's where he inputs any information that he needs to input, a printer, and a smart card reader. So this printer is to emit receipts in cases where you have, say, transfer from one system to another, that you would have some sort of discount, but you don't have an actual ticketing, like smart card connection. But in their case, they bought this solution, the entire solution. This is a solution from France, and by they, I mean CRTP. They don't use this printer very much. It's just as a receipt sometimes. But the smart card reader has been essential for what they're doing, because the main thing that they needed to do was what drove them to adopt this solution was they were looking for an alternative for their paper-based monthly passes. So they have passes that were, as I said, paper-based. They had to distribute this to over 20 selling locations. And this process was very burdensome for them, because they need to go there every month and collect and provide new paper passes and get money back from these places. So they were looking for, they wanted to transition from a paper-based fare collection system to a smart card fare collection system. And they were looking for this fare payment solution for over a year. They wanted to allow riders to register and recharge their cards online. But everything that you could find in Canada ended up being either too complex or specific designed with large agencies in mind, or unaffordable for them. So after a year searching for this solution, I think it was in a conference that the person mentioned, they connected with a French vendor. And this French vendor had this integrated cloud and smartphone solution that fit what they needed in terms of fare collection, and had the added benefit of having a CAD AVL module that connected with this fare system. So it was an account-based fare collection system that had CAD AVL module. So those two models they are connected natively from the back end from the provider, and they combine real-time data available. They provide real-time data back to the office in a web page. And when I say data, they provide things like the load factor, so how many people are inside the vehicle, the number of boardings at each stop, so that they can know, for example, one spot, specific bus stop is being underused, or they need to, underused is a good enough example. Or they also have the system has they still accept cash because they needed to still accept it, but the system allows the driver to input cash payments through the smartphone, so it goes back to the office, so they have real-time information on fare payment too. So I think that about this, I can talk about this solution for a long time, but I think the two main things or lessons learned from this one is that you can persist and you're going to find a solution you need. It's not sometimes finding a technological solution for a small provider does take more effort than others. And we try to help developing things like this guidebook. But again, it's not an easy solution. You're kind of swimming against the flow. And the second thing is that they highlighted a lot is the engagement process with the drivers and whatever in general, like internal outreach. Because in the early stages of this practice, it was very critical for them to have the provider closer to them, providing, helping with technical challenges that they had. And they really need, in this case, for this technological solution to work, drivers that were really engaged with this and saw the benefit in having it and knew how to operate the system in the smartphone. Our second example here relates to Microtransit. Microtransit is a technology-enabled demand response service. So it is in general an on-demand technology. What Microtransit does is adding technology to a demand response service so that you can have the scheduling and the distribution of vehicles, let's say, and mapping the trip and calculating itinerary more efficient through a technological solution. So in this case, the main goal was to many, excuse me. The thing, I'm gonna read this better than what I was describing before. Like other demand response services, Microtransit is typically operated with small vehicles, but the thing is, it uses a software that dynamically generate routes to respond to riders' requests in real time. So the goal with this is to allow riders to schedule trips with less time in advance, and the wait times should also be shorter. In this case that we're talking about in Johnson County is close to Kansas City. And the idea here was to provide a service that would help with first and last mile connections and expand service to some areas. So in 2019, Johnson County, Kansas, located in Kansas City metropolitan area, they implemented this Microtransit solution. The service experienced rapid growth, followed by rapidly modification in operations in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So Johnson County, it's located next to Kansas, like southwest of Kansas City. So it's an economic engine of the state. It's the most populous county in the state. So it's not the typical rural environment, but it's still a suburban environment, lower density. So this solution fits. Demand response solutions fit very well with that lower density characteristic of suburban areas and more rural areas. That's what they call flex service. They had two main goals. One was this, as I mentioned, serve first and last mile connections. And the other one was to better connect residents to transit options that were existing. So it's allowing people to better use an infrastructure that is existed there. already existed there. They work with the larger agency in the region, right, KC, and one of the main things that they wanted with this service too was to expand service into the weekend, so they have more Saturday. So this work, they were designing the service to work more, to have a greater demand on weekends too. So in terms of takeaways from this or lessons learned, they partnered with the vendor Translock and the larger agency, and they were taking advantage of a pre-existing contract. And this allowed them to rapidly respond to the changes that they had to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this is something that was just like interesting to see how taking advantage of existing partnerships can help you with the system. And the other thing that they noted was in terms of planning a service, that you should have contingency plans when things are not going as planned. But not only you're having fewer passengers, but in this case, they were having a lot more demand than they were expected. So they had to quickly expand the service and improve their fleet and expand their fleet and expand their drivers, pool of drivers. And that was only possible because they had this pre-existing contract with a taxi service. So it's just one thing to note when you're designing pilots, things can go too well and you might need more, might need more resources than you were planning for. And the last of the three topics I'm going to talk about today is the passenger information and GTFS feed. This is more known and I think it's more common, more discussed again. It's something that is widely adopted in larger contexts, and it is slowly expanding to rural areas. We're talking about the Vermont Agency of Transportation, VTrans, in Vermont, and we consider this a rural context because it's statewide. And I think the main thing about this specific case is that it goes beyond GTFS feed, which is a standard format for making trip planning accessible for public use via interactive web applications. This can be developed by agencies or third parties. And the step beyond that this one does is to provide a GTFS-Flex. So GTFS-Flex, it incorporates demand response types of services that include demand response or deviated fixed route services, or fixed route services where you can flag stops in different locations so that you don't have a specific stop location. And this enables the GTFS, this data standard, to be expanded to rural areas. And with this data, the service data standardized, you allow agencies and also third parties to get that standardized data and provide users with planning tools. So in 2018, they launched this trip planner that incorporated GTFS and GTFS-Flex, so they could go beyond just fixed route transit services. In 2020, they upgraded this to include different capabilities to the app. And the GTFS-Flex is what makes this trip planning tool really relevant for the state as a whole. And quickly, in terms of what were 4 topics that we identified throughout the 10 praxis that we looked at and how they relate to, I think this is our big message to this guidebook. So the importance of partnerships, the importance of vendor research and engagement, the importance of stakeholder involvement and planning. So those agencies that we talk about in the guidebook, they varied in terms of nature, types of benefits, and also technological solutions. But they all have those 4 themes in common. So in those things, they showed resourceful agencies and how they found ways to fund and implement new practices and that are cost effective, practical, and improve the service they're delivering to their clients. So quickly about partnerships, Several of those 10 practices that we talked about in this guidebook, partnerships were fundamental for the development of them. That means for the partnerships to get funding, partnerships to get staff hours, which is funding sometimes. Say you need an application to be, you partner with other governmental agencies, for example, that might have more staff availability to develop to work with you to develop part of your technical solution or to test this technical solution, or in case, for example, of accessibility solutions that need a writer to be trained. This can be sometimes done with staff outside of your transit agency. And so funding, staff hours, technical expertise, all those things helped partnerships allow agencies to have access to those resources outside of the agency. And sometimes, as I said, it's also interesting to look beyond the transportation agents industry, because you can have partnerships with university that are essential to many solutions that try to go beyond and innovate. And the second thing we highlight is vendor research and engagement. I think the example I gave before about Putnuf is a great one, that there's a very small agency, they have 3 staff, and they were searching for for fare collection vendor for a long time. And it was this search led them to a French French company. Of course, they're in Quebec, so they have the language that connects them, but it's really across the ocean to get a vendor that had a solution for small providers that they could not find in the North American context. But you also have here, one of the things that we talk about in the guidebook, there is electrification. So how some agencies can work very closely with the company that is developing the trains, they're developing the buses, or developing the charging stations. Stakeholder involvement, I think Vermont is like best example in terms of how much time you need, how the time invested in stakeholder involvement pays off, and how Vermont, which is the solution of the planning that allowed for the solution, the planning app solution, and how they work with the Vermont Association of Blind and Visually Impaired and the Vermont Center for Independent Living made this solution viable. So it's very important to look at key stakeholders outside, key stakeholders in the community, key stakeholders in internal to, as I said before, driver engagement, for example. And lastly, about planning, I think all of them have some planning lessons learned. And for example, Vermont, they noted, for example, that they had a lack of established measures of success in the beginning. So setting those in the outset of the project will allow you to evaluate, one, how difficult things is, and how much what you have is sufficient knowledge about, or what is the desired outcome that you're looking at, and what your end user needs. All those things need to be, it's really good when you have those pretty well organized in the beginning, so that you can assess the success of your solution. That is also especially important when you're thinking about pilots. That's very common to start new microtransit solutions as a pilot. So you need to really know how to track the development of your solution. Portnoy, for example, their vendor said that they would need 3 months to train drivers. In their experience, they needed twice this time. They had issues with time zone difference. So those are the things that you need to think about when you're planning for a system. And just, yeah, so I think this is one thing. And the last point about planning for program expansion was very crucial for the microtransit example that they had. They were too successful. This guidebook is available at the NCAT page, so n-cat2cs.org. We've worked with them on another guidebook about data practices. So we're looking at how data standards, open sources, and how those things have been used in smaller contexts too. That is pretty interesting. Here's my contact information. We're going to repeat this in the end, but now Gina takes on to talk about our second example.
Thank you, Ronaldo, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about our work with the Appalachian Regional Commission on the Public Transportation in Appalachia Inventory and Assessment. I just put a link in the chat to the full report. It is very extensive and we're covering a very small bit of it in just a few minutes here before we get to Q&A. So I encourage you, if you are really interested in this topic, I hope you will check out the full report. And so what we're going to talk about today is just an overview of what the report was, and then really focusing a little bit in on the challenges and best practices related to technology that we talked about in the report. So the Appalachian Regional Commission is, as many of you I'm sure know, an economic development partnership agency that's part of the federal government that serves 13 states and more than 420 counties across the Appalachian region. And their mission is really focused on economic development, building community capacity to better communities across the Appalachian region. And historically, their focus in transportation has been on the highway side, and this was really their first foray into looking at transit access and the role that it plays in helping with community development, workforce development, job access, and all of those types of issues that they're part of their day-to-day bread and butter. And on the next slide, you can see that the sort of main purposes of our report for their reasons were really to look at what is the presence of public transportation in Appalachia in terms of its coverage, service availability across these 13 states. What is the adequacy of public transportation that's available to serve what the needs are in these communities? And again, to highlight what are the challenges and best practices in delivering service across this region. And we also provided some really simplified guidance as part of a series of fact sheets for each state that were developed that helps the non-transportation stakeholders in this region kind of understand public transportation space better and how they can get involved in expanding access to public transportation across the region. And so we're going to go right into the findings of our big effort here. So of the 420 counties across the region, there are actually 185 where there's some type of fixed route service. We had data for 178 counties that were served by fixed route service. And we also found that 27% of workers in these counties live within a half mile of a transit stop. There are a total of 382 demand response providers in the region. And of these 382, they serve 394 of the 420 counties. However, just about almost 3/4 or 295 of these counties have a demand response service that is open to the general public. And so we're really focused on that because obviously if we did look at things like counties where there's demand response service that, for example, is Medicaid transportation or might be limited to specific populations, say seniors or persons with disabilities. So in our analysis, we looked at what those were, but we're really focused on where is there demand response service that anyone who would like to use public transportation service can access it. Tennessee is the only state where demand response service is open to the general public in every single county across the whole region. And really wanted to note that, you know, of the 420 counties, there are 47 where there's no public transportation service, whether it's fixed route or demand response that's open to the general public. In terms of what's the quality of the service across the region, most fixed route systems operate on weekdays and weekends, but only during the daytime. There are 119 counties that have weekend service, 62 with evening service, but very few rural counties, just 7%, have one trip in the evening. We also found that in 3/4 of Appalachian counties, demand response service is only available on the weekdays. Evening service, again, for demand response is limited with operating hours that range between 8 and 12 hours per day in most counties, with riders needing to make reservations for demand response service in the day before the trip in the majority of counties. Only 6% of counties across Appalachia allow you to book a demand response trip and take it on the same day. But there's great diversity across the states and all of these metrics, both for on the fixed route side and the demand response side. And so all of that information is actually available at the county level in the full report if you're interested. And then looking specifically at Virginia, so there's 25 counties in this Commonwealth that are part of the Appalachian region. Of those, 16 of them have some presence of fixed route service. 10 have demand response service that is open to the general public. And I did want to note there are 6 counties where there's no public transportation service in Virginia that is open to the general public. Virginia is also on the lower side in terms of looking at job accessibility and fixed route service in the Appalachian region. And as you can see on the slide, that's about 20% of workers live near fixed route service in Appalachian Virginia, which is lower than some of the peer states, as you can see shown here on the slide. And one of the other things that we were also going to note is that the state provides match for federal funds. And so there's only 8 of the 13 states that do that. So that's a good plus for the state in terms of being a best practice. And talking about the best practices and challenges, there were over 50 specific best practices and challenges that relate to things that transit providers doing, what's happening at the state Department of Transportation level, what regional and local organizations are doing to advance and support public transportation. And so we took all of those 50 best practices and challenges that came up in the course of our study, which included not just the development of this inventory, but we also did a comprehensive review of how rural transit programs are structured in each state, working with each state Department of Transportation. We did a transit provider survey in the region that had well over 100 individual providers respond. So we had a lot of input into developing these 50 best practices and challenges. And of the 10 themes that we grouped these into, one of them was technology. And so, our high level takeaway on the challenges is that, there is a gap, as Ronaldo talked about in the last presentation, between the technology that is available and implemented and specific to rural transit providers and small urban transit providers, and what our larger major systems throughout the country have and available and have implemented. And that really has a day-to-day impact on public transportation operations and the experience of people who are taking the services every day. The cost of a lot of that off-the-shelf operational technology can be very prohibitive, as Ronaldo mentioned again in the last presentation, the example in Quebec. They couldn't find the type of technology that they were looking for within their cost, what they could pay for it, and that was going to be suitable to their service area. So that is also a big issue that's faced in the Appalachian region. And, there's also, I think a lot of energy at the federal level around research and innovation, demonstration grants, but a lot of those are scaled in such a way, and they're very competitive. So they're not really kind of suitable for what maybe a small agency that has 2 or 3 people working at it can access feasibly to help them implement some of these newer technologies that are coming on the market. And, finally, there's, I think, challenges that are just really specific to the region, looking at like the types of specialized vehicles that you need to operate in very mountainous areas, and as well as looking at, the population densities and the scale and size, internet accessibility across the region. All of those things are very, I think, unique, maybe to the Appalachian region as a whole. This picture I took actually is in Newcastle in Craig County. I took this picture 10 years ago when we were working on a transit feasibility study for the county. And you can get a sense of the terrain. And actually, this day that we visited, the county council member who was taking us out recommended that we take Dramamine before we went on a tour of the county. I'm very glad she did, because I definitely needed that Dramamine. Also gives you a sense, I think, of the types of, throughout Appalachia, the types of communities we're serving. This is the county seat, and it has 150 residents, and it's the largest population center in this county that has more than 5,200 people over 330 square miles. So this is the challenge that is faced in a lot of the most rural areas of the Appalachian region. So getting to some best practices, we heard a lot about scheduling and dispatching. It was the area where particularly the transit providers noted that this is kind of their biggest need in terms of what kinds of technology that they would like to have. And that we know also just from agencies that have overcome this, that they've seen a range of actual benefits, not only to themselves in terms of operational efficiencies, but also to their riders. And so we talk in the report about what some of those benefits are to individual organizations. For example, there was a transit provider in Alabama that had been doing scheduling with pen and paper and a physical map. And once they were able to implement this type of software, they were able to offer many, many more rides and trips to people because they were able to more efficiently use their resources. And there was another provider in North Carolina that mentioned that they would have like 2 riders in a single vehicle at a time when they were scheduling by hand. But once they were able to get the software, they were able, again, to figure out how they can accommodate even more people without adding drivers or more vehicles to their system. And this kind of dovetails into, I think, what is one of our bigger best practices in the report, which is that, you know, taking this statewide approach to procuring some of these types of technologies, making it available to small urban and rural providers, both reduces the overall cost and all creates opportunities for interoperability, and really, you know, creates the opportunity for these agencies to access this type of technology. So at the time that we were finalizing this report at the end of last year, North Carolina DOT had been looking at purchasing, scheduling, and dispatching software for their small urban and rural providers. Pennsylvania, the Department of Transportation already does that for paratransit scheduling. And so every agency in the state, from, you know, SEPTA, with operating the transit service in the city of Philadelphia, to the smallest, you know, parts that communities in the state, have access to the same experience in terms of the software that's available. Another example in Pennsylvania was that the state developed an innovative public-private partnership to create fueling stations for compressed natural gas-powered vehicles, then allowed a lot of their Appalachian providers to actually purchase those vehicles for the first time. And lastly, on our best practices here, we're talking about another area that was really of a lot of interest to the transit providers who participated in our study was mobile ticketing and electronic ticketing. You know, there are issues with scaling some of this technology, making it accessible in rural areas. We did find a couple of good examples, including some in North Carolina, and again, some in Pennsylvania, where they've begun to implement either electronic fare cards or implement mobile ticketing. I think one of the most interesting sort of individual transit agency examples we found in our research for the report was looking at Tompkins County in New York, where they are very much trying to implement this idea of mobility as a service, where they become the provider of transportation service integrated with, you know, other types of, you know, providers, be they public or private or volunteer providers within their community. And so they do actually have an app now where you can access their demand response service. And their vision is, again, to really go beyond traditional transit and reach this mobility as a service goal, if you will, that many larger agencies have, but they're doing it as a smaller agency. And I think that is inspirational. And again, there's more information on that in the report if we want to do that. But I did want to end there because we want to have a few minutes here for questions and answers. Thank you.
Wonderful. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box at this point, but we'd remind people that you can find the complete public transportation and Appalachia report, and the link is in your chat box that Shana added. Also, if you would like to ask a question of our presenters, you can use the raise the hand function or send us a message in the chat that you'd like to be unmuted, and we can allow you to turn your camera on and ask your question live. Or you can submit a question in the chat or Q&A box. We do have one. From Stephen Johnson, is anyone aware of research that has calculated the efficiency gains of moving from manual reservation scheduling, dispatching to computer aided?
That's a great question. And so in the report, what we do have are the experiences of individual agencies that have, told us, including the couple that I just mentioned, that they went from being able to schedule X number of people per day to being able to serve, a new number of rides per day. I have not personally seen if there's been sort of a comprehensive review just on that particular question. I'm sure there might be vendors out there who perhaps might want to give you an answer on that. But in terms of sort of an independent, report or estimate, that's not something I've personally seen. If someone else has seen that, I would be interested in seeing that as well. But definitely in the report, we're set a number of individual agencies that gave us information on what their experience was with that.
All right, great. Haven't seen any other questions come in. That just means you guys did a phenomenal job presenting. Again, if anybody has any questions, let us know. You can also find the CM number. This webinar is available for CM credit in the chat as well. I will also put it back in there. Shana and Ronaldo, thank you for presenting with us. We've really enjoyed listening to you all. And as always, it's recorded and will be posted to the chapter's YouTube page for people to view later. And if we don't have any further questions, then we will let everybody out a few minutes early. And is there anything else you all would like to add? Oh, we did have one pop in from Josh. And now they're popping in, of course. Has your research explored the potential for higher educational institutions, community colleges, to promote and support establishing or expanding transit in rural communities?
There was one of the case studies that is in the guidebook that Ronaldo was talking about that looks specifically at technical assistance from university for a tribal transit provider in implementing an alternative fuel solution. So that is, basically that transit provider would not have been able to develop or implement it if this technical assistance hadn't been provided from the university. They came up with a plan for how they were going to reuse cooking oil to fuel transit buses, essentially. And then, the transit agency implemented what had been a student project with some assistance from a specialized vendor. So one of the themes from the guidebook for NCAT was that it's really partnerships, because when you don't have a lot of, you have limited staff, you have a limited budget, you do need to look at, who are the other folks in the community that can provide some kind of assistance. And in that particular case, it was a university, and the assistance they were providing was really planning and research innovation type of assistance, great opportunity for those students. I think, not a community college educational example, but another one, I don't know, Ronaldo, you might want to mention is
with the
Yep.
the Appalachian study that we have, we interviewed Applecart, APPALCRT, that is in Boone County, North Carolina, where they work with the Appalachian University there. and they have a partnership where the students in university help with their GIS needs. This is something that I remember too, it was thanks to their partnership with the university that they could do a lot of the planning work that they do with their fixed route service.
Yeah, and there's some other different types of partners, I think, explored in both reports, including working with like social services agencies, particularly in some of the solutions that were explored in the guidebook around disabilities and better serving people with disabilities, that they worked, hand in hand with the agencies that serve those populations to, fund, finance, conceptualize, deliver. The Vermont example also, there was a lot of engagement with other agencies and communities, not just to get their input, but also to really, shape and help develop the solutions at the end of the day. And then I see there's a question about internet connections being a problem in rural areas, and doesn't that make mobile ticketing a problem? That is a topic that has come up in both of these reports and other work that Ronaldo and I have done as well. It's not one that really has like a great solution, to be completely honest with you. I think that it's something that I know for sure the Appalachian region is still struggling with. But we do see that in areas where they have been able to deploy some type of mobile ticketing, that's not the only solution. And even in areas where there's outside of mobile ticketing, maybe they're trying to do more web-based on-demand, service, like the type of microtransit application that Ronaldo talked about in Johnson County. There are rural communities that have implemented that. Notably, North Carolina has I think a little bit of a famous example right now in the town of Wilson, North Carolina, which replaced all of their fixed route service with demand response, and have been able to serve a lot more riders doing that. There's about a town of about 50,000 people. So it's really small urban. But, in those cases, that's doing a lot of education, making sure there's still that call-in option, because even if you're in an area where there is, I guess you could say, adequate internet connectivity and people have access to it, there's other issues that they might be encountered either with familiarity with using some of these mobile applications, or with data limits, or all sorts of different sort of equity related issues. So there's never, even in cases where they've implemented some type of solution that's going to rely on an app or access to the internet, that never can be the only option, right? Because it will be limiting to many people.
Yeah, I think the Canadian example again, they have two services: the commuter routes and the demand response, whose I would say a large percentage of the clientele is seniors. With the commuter service, they have basically 100% adoption of the monthly pass via the smart card. But for the demand response service, where you don't have the monthly pass, so the capabilities of adding money and renewing your passes online are not that important, the adoption of the smart card is much lower. So that happens when you have specific coworkers that might have a harder time adopting new solutions. And they mentioned something similar towards their riders, how important it was to work with riders, but I meant drivers, how important it is to work with their drivers when they're adopting these new technologies, that they really need to be on board. And sometimes there can be some resistance there.
Well, great. Thank you guys so much. It looks like everybody really enjoyed the presentation. And again, we thank you both to our presenters and our attendees for joining us this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month on October 25th, and even before that at our annual conference at Hotel Roanoke, or joining us virtually. Again, we look forward to next month. Thank you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.